Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Aligned Love Podcast. This is the place where I am going to help you find the one thing that you feel is missing: healthy love. I am your host, Lauren Zoeller, and in this podcast, I will share with you how to attract love, live in alignment, and elevate your deepest relationships. So buckle up, get present, tune into your body, and open up to the possibility that you truly do get to have it all. Let's dive in.
Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lauren.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I had no idea that I knew we were going to be in person, but I didn't know that you lived so close and that you were going to be able to be here without any issue. It's exciting to do things in person.
Yes, it absolutely is. And this place is, like I said, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to be talking a lot today about boundaries and dating and relationships and how we can start to have deeper intentionality when we set boundaries when we're dating and also in partnership. So I'm curious, tell us a little bit more about how this became your specialty of really diving into intentionality and setting boundaries from a space of, it sounds like, deep embodiment.
The biggest thing was I didn't have boundaries at all. And so I think that's where we essentially learn from, I guess you could call it, our mistakes. This was something where my business, my relationship, everything was out of whack. And I really had to get to this place of something has to change. So it wasn't like I just all of a sudden had these boundaries in place in my relationships. There was so much lacking that I was like, I cannot do this anymore. And that's when everything changed for me in the boundary department.
Yeah. It's funny because I have a membership called Home, and we have a different theme that we work on every month. And this month, it just so happens to be boundaries, like how to set boundaries inside of the nervous system and what it looks like to not just set a boundary, but maintain a boundary and how to hold it. And one of my favorite videos, and I don't know if you've seen it, but one of my favorite videos out on the internet is of Brene Brown talking about boundaries. And one of the things that she says that I think is so profound is that in her research, so in her, God knows how long she's been doing research.
Right.
It's her only thing. But she said in all of her research of looking at people who had strong boundaries, she realized that they were the most compassionate people on the planet. And I remember hearing that for the first time and I was like, whoa, that's wild to think compassion and boundaries. Most people don't think that those two things go together, but they are, because when you can say yes to yourself, you're also giving the other person permission to get curious around where they're not saying yes to themselves. So I'm curious how that shows up for you in the way that you teach boundaries and the way that you execute boundaries. Do you believe that? Are you in alignment with that too?
Yeah, absolutely. So with boundaries, first and foremost, I think that is basically what you said is the greatest love that we can honor ourselves in that place. But it's also this place of not just saying yes to everybody, because when you say yes to everybody, then you're just giving people a diluted version of yourself. And when you have a boundary in place, you're first and foremost honoring yourself, but then you're also honoring that person. And I think people have this huge misconception with boundaries have to be an attack or it's against the other person. And it has nothing to do with the other person actually to start with. Mm-hmm. It has everything to do with us and what we need to establish for our relationship or our life to run smoothly. And so, the biggest thing for just boundaries in general that I normally tell people is you have to start with yourself. Mm-hmm. What serves you, what doesn't. And once you start figuring that out, then you can start working through, hey, how do I want this to look in my other relationships that I have? And that was like the biggest thing with my husband. I would just say yes, I would say yes. And it was just this constant frustration then for me, because maybe I didn't want to do something or, I was feeling a little resentful. And that's where I had to say, like, wait a second, like first I have to have this communication. And then I have to have this boundary that's understood, because if not, then I'm just going to be spiraling out of control. And there is no, it's just going to be frustrating in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is, because I think on simple terms, when we really boil down what is a boundary, it is what is okay and what is not okay. Mm-hmm. What's okay to me and what am I going to allow in and what also is not okay for me to allow in. And I think that, it's so easy to talk about boundaries as a concept, but, and this, this podcast is all about dating and relationships. To say it is one thing, but what I get all the time from women is I don't really know where I need to set boundaries when it comes to my dating life and getting to know someone and entering into partnership, or even when I'm in partnership, where do those boundaries need to lie? So do you have any suggestions for where people can start to just get curious about that conversation of, hey, this may be where a boundary needs to be put in place?
Yeah. First and foremost, though, you have to be clear on what you're even wanting in the relationship, as well as, in order to set that boundary. Mm-hmm. If you don't know what you want in that relationship, if you don't know where you're at or what you're expecting, it is going to be so hard to put those rules in place. And the biggest thing that I think people have kind of this fog about, or they just don't have the clarity, is what they even want in their relationship. And I break it down personally into my intention and what I'm wanting. And so for me, it comes around to, with intentionality, where am I wanting to see this relationship in 6 months from now? In order to do that, what do I need to create space for or boundaries for in order to get to that point? And so I look at every aspect of my husband and I and our relationship, and I say, what can I do to better support this relationship? This isn't just about what can he give me, but how do I want to show up intentionally? And in order for us to show up as our best versions of ourselves, we have to be in that place of intention. Mm. And in intention, you also have boundaries. And so for people to get clear on that would be really the first and foremost of, what am I wanting from this, in order to then create that boundary from it.
Yeah. So I'm hearing set an intention, and then from that intention, reverse engineer what boundaries need to be put in place in order for this intention to come to fruition, in order for this new reality, this new identity to make its way in. And I love that. It's brilliant because, it's one thing to talk about setting a boundary inside of a partnership and having someone that you can execute a boundary with. I sometimes think the hardest boundaries to set are the ones with ourselves.
Yes.
And I know, before I met my current partner, when I had exited my last relationship, that was a really hard conversation that I had to have with myself, because I did have to set the intention. What do I want to call into my life in the partnership realm? Mm. What does it look like? How does the identity of that woman, which is not the identity that I'm currently in now, how does she act? How does she feel? What is she emoting? What does she believe? Mm-hmm. And when I started to get really curious around those questions, I realized I'm going to have to be really boundaried around holding that intention as sacred and acting in that way. And that may not be the way that I'm currently acting right now in the identity that I'm in, exiting a relationship and trying to find something that's new. So I'm curious, when you do set the intention, and that from a single perspective, like if you're single and you're out there dating, what does it look like to set a boundary in that realm of, this is what I want to call in, this is the way I've always acted, and I need to set a boundary in order to be able, with myself, in order to be able to actually call that thing into my life?
God, that's such a good question. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've been in a relationship for 26 years now. So I'm just like, single, what would this be? Gosh, how it would be so different than when I was 16. So I think, it really boils back to how am I wanting to show up? You know, I had this conversation with my friend and I said, like, what do you want? Like, what do you want this dynamic with this person to look like? And, you know, are you wanting, you know, someone to do hobbies with or not? Are you wanting this? Are you wanting that? And she's like, I never even like thought about those types of things. So it was really like, what can you set for yourself before you're trying to go out and change anything with anybody else? And I think that's the biggest thing that people go out seeking. Well, normally they go out and they find what their past traumas were to like fulfill those. But I mean, if someone has like really done the work and has that awareness, they would be able to say, hey, look, I realize who I once was, and now stepping into this, I really have to put myself first in these different spaces. And that's really, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be very, very simple. And I think a lot of people overcomplicate that process of just the simplicity of it.
Ladies, let's talk about something we don't hear enough about: options. For years, I thought that love, marriage, and babies had to happen on a set timeline. But here's the truth. Your timeline, it's yours to create. And that is why I have made the decision to freeze my eggs with Tennessee Fertility Institute, because having choices is power. Whether you're focusing on your career, waiting for the right partner, or simply want to give yourself peace of mind, fertility preservation lets you take control of your future on your terms. If you have ever wondered if egg freezing is right for you, this is your sign. Tennessee Fertility Institute makes the process simple, supportive, and designed for you. You can book your free consult today at tnfertility.com/contact-us. Again, that is tnfertility.com/contact-us, because your future deserves options. Yeah. I mean, just from a personal share, you know, when I exited my last, and how this looked in my own personal life, when I exited my last relationship, I was working insane hours. I was working like morning until night. I would sometimes work into the weekends, on Sundays. There was no real space and time inside of my calendar. And something I deeply desired was partnership and a family. And I remember exiting that relationship and saying to myself, okay, if I want partnership and I want a relationship that's fulfilling, I don't have any space for it. And so I'm going to need to create space. And the boundary that I had to set for myself was, if I'm going to create the space, I have to keep the space. And I think that there are so many successful, high-achieving women who think that in theory. They want a relationship, they want a family, right? Whether they're in their late 30s, 40s, 50s. But yet, when they create space, they feel like they need to fill the space, and they don't actually adhere to the boundary of, no, this is the intention that I set. And because it's the intention, I'm not going to add 5 more podcast interviews on a Tuesday, right? Because it feels like that's going to kind of fill that cup and fill that time. So just for, I guess, anyone that's listening who's in the space of being single, what tips do you have if that is the case? If they're trying to adhere to this boundary that's new, that feels uncomfortable, that feels like, oh my gosh, I can see the intention, but the trauma's coming in. I really want to fill it. How do people maintain the boundaries that they keep, whether it's personal or inside of a relationship? What tips do you have for that?
So I love that you brought up the success and creating that space, because I too was, and that's really where everything changed for me in the boundaries and intentionality, because I was truly burning the candle at both ends, like seriously. And it was really a huge wake up call where I was like, this is nuts. Because like you said, you cannot have a relationship and no space. It doesn't work. And now, once I realized I did have to say a lot of no's to other people. So I think that space in the single world, people would have to say, like, boundaries aren't just with a significant other. It could be, with family or friends or coworkers. It could just be even with ourselves and saying, like, I am not going to do this. But the biggest thing is if you're not tracking this every single day, you cannot get better. And I'd like to take stuff in quarters. So I'll say specifically with my husband, I'll take a quarter. So we're in March right now. So at the very beginning of January, I said, what do we want this relationship to look like over the next 3 months? And then we wrote everything down and, what are we wanting to do? How are we wanting to support each other? And then I had my own set of intentions. And literally, I broke it down from quarters to months, then to weeks to days. And so then I can say, hey, how did I show up every single day for my husband? And at the end of the week, I could say, was I able to show up all of those days? And if I didn't, what does that look like now? That goes the same for boundaries. That is like, hey, did I create and carve that space instead of working? Mm-hmm. Did I create that space for him during this time where I said no to work, or I had to say no to my friend to helping her because I needed to create that space for us? In the dating world, I would really go back to, and I know that sounds like a broken record, but it's really going back to getting clear on what is it that you are even wanting. Because, and what I mean by that is like in your work, mm-hmm. in your relationships with your family and friends, what percentage of you can you give? Because if you're giving in all these other areas, you really have to ask yourself that honest question, like, can I actually be intentional into this relationship and give the best version of me if I'm giving myself to everybody else?
Yeah. And I think that that's a really valid point that everybody hopefully can hear, because on the flip side of this, now being in a partnership with 2 little girls underneath the age of 5 and and we have chickens and ducks and like all the things, I would never have had time for that. There would have been no space to be able to call that in, which is why I didn't call it in for the longest time, right? I was attracting men who were just as busy as me and then wondering why I felt so depleted and so unfulfilled and there was a lack of intimacy. And it was because I was not allowing myself to be intentional in the boundaries that I was setting for myself. And I think, that pulls me around to another point, that everything that you desire in your life comes down to you first and what boundaries you're willing to make and set for yourself so that you can invite someone else into that space that you've created. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
And it's hard. I feel like boundaries are the hardest.
They are.
The hardest thing to execute and keep and maintain.
Yeah. And I think too, people need to know that space is okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, and I can say with just the best of the best that my crazy schedule and just the chase that I was chasing for so long, there was like the satisfaction in that was just like I could never catch up to it. And that's where I was like, is this really living? Is this really like the ultimate fulfillment that I'm wanting? And it really wasn't.
Yeah.
Especially once I got out of it, I'm like, what was I doing? And now I'm like, I have so much more time and I feel so good and my relationships are on point because I'm able to give myself that space. And then I'm also able to create that space, with my kids and my husband as well.
Yeah. I laugh because, some of my women who make their way through my programs, they'll come to me and they'll say, I feel like I want to slow down more. It's like this work has given me access to space. It's given me access to resiliency and to peace and to so much spaciousness. And I want more. And I laugh and I tell them like, yeah, that's why we live on a farm and there's nobody around and we have so much space, because the more that you can really allow yourself to feel safety and spaciousness, you realize like it's presence. That's the golden ticket. It's what everybody's chasing. It's why everybody's, diving into healing. It's slowing down and feeling it.
It is. And I have chickens too, and 5 acres. And I'm like, this is like the best.
It's the life.
It is.
It really is the life.
It is. It is. So I completely agree. It's so good.
Yeah. And it's so cool. Get some chickens. They force you to be present.
They do. They do.
Like,
they're amazing.
They are so amazing. I love it. And I know that there's a lot of women that are going to listen to this and resonate with, everything that we've talked about today, because boundaries are hard. They're really hard. And I feel like we could probably talk about this for 2 hours on how we can start to set better boundaries, whether we're dating or in partnership. They're always important. And coming back home to yourself and really recognizing what boundaries need to be set internally is the key to really, really strong relationships. So I have one last question for you that I ask every person that comes on the Aligned Love podcast. And so I'm curious to know your answer. When you hear the words aligned love, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you feel? What resonates inside of your soul and your body? What does that definition mean to you?
Okay, so I will say I did not know that you would ask me this, but the first thing that came to mind was the specific intentionality and space that I am creating with my kids and my husband. And it has absolutely changed my relationships with them and my life in fulfillment. And so that aligned love, I would say, is meeting someone on that deepest level of communication and relationship and just the depth of that. So I would say that finding that intentionality with those people was like my people, my kids and husband. That I would say is like my greatest aligned love.
Yeah. Yeah. So really finding the depth and the intentionality in your relationships is what led you there.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Thank you. So Rachel, where can people find out about you? I know that you have retreats that people can join, and you have one coming up.
Yes. In Spain.
Yeah, so beautiful.
Never been. So
you've never been to Spain?
Girl, I'm like on my farm at my house.
So what part of Spain?
It's Malaga. So it's south.
Okay.
So Costa del Sol area.
So pretty. You're going to love it. You're going to fall in love. I love Spain so much. I'm so jealous. Good. But tell everybody how they can sign up and how they can be a part of it if they want to be.
Absolutely. So they can go to rachelclosson.com. And I have my retreats on there. And if that one has passed, because it's next month, then we can go ahead and they can get on the wait list, because we have another one planned for next year.
Yay. Have you announced where it's
not
going to be
yet.
yet? Okay. I was like, is it in Spain
Once
too?
Spain's done, then we'll announce it. Yeah.
Okay. And we'll make sure to drop all of that in the show notes below so that people can take advantage of it. And then Rachel, where can people find you? If they want to follow along on your journey and also just come into your world, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, I would say Instagram, I guess. So it's Rachel Closson _.
Okay.
Like I said, with my time, I'm like, I try to be super, super intentional with it. But if I am going to be somewhere, I will be there.
Beautiful. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom about boundaries. And for everyone that is listening, if this inspired you, please make sure that you share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Rachel, I'm so glad that we're in Nashville together, and hopefully I'll have you on the show again soon.
Thanks, Lauren.
That wraps up today's episode of the Aligned Love podcast. One thing that would really help me and the other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment wherever you tune in and listen. Also, make sure to link up with me on Instagram at Lauren Zoeller, and please share this podcast with anyone who you think may enjoy it. Until next episode, remember, every transformation begins with one moment of awareness, and I hope today has been yours. I'll see you next time.